Mr. Zion, Mr. Sinwar, it's my understanding that there was an incident on the 7th of October in 2023. Is that correct?
Yes, Judge.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Sinwar, you are suing Mr. Zion for damages, and it is your claim that you were simply launching a military operation in order to liberate your people and do a prisoner exchange. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And Mr. Zion, it is your counterclaim that Mr. Sinwar was attempting a genocide to wipe out your entire people.
Yes, Your Honor, that is correct.
Tell me what happened.
Why do you ask such a question?
Mr. Sinwar!
Why don't we talk about what happened before?
Mr. Sinwar!
But I wanted to say, before...
Quiet. Mr. Sinwar, let me explain how this is going to work, okay? I'm going to ask the questions. You're going to give me the answer. Is that clear?
Fine.
Good. Tell me about October 7th. Clearly there was a kerfuffle, yes? Now tell me what happened.
Well, don't want to talk about the 7th. This is a distraction.
Bert, if you can't answer a simple question, we're going to be here a long time, and I don't have a lot of patience.
I thought this was an Elon Musk interview. That's okay. Elon Levy's a great guy. Where's the apartheid, bitch?
I don't really like the way the question is formulated.
Hezbollah says, oh, no, we just want to fire rockets in peace. Well, I'll tell you this. I want Israel to win, Elon. After. Oh, just defending the idea.
So I am saying one thing and another thing. And who knows? What, you think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
Soothing Semantics podcast. I am your host, Rafi Pinsky. Make sure, as always, to subscribe to the channel, smash the like button, leave your comments. For all of your real estate needs in South Florida, follow me at Rafi the Realtor. Would love to be of assistance with buying, selling, and investing. Without further ado, we have the man of many voices, maybe the Jewish Robin Williams.
I'll take it.
Is it something you'll take? Okay.
Absolutely.
So I came across Ami's Instagram around October 7th time. Found his impressions incredible. I think one of your early videos was the Jordan Peterson impression at Home Depot.
Yeah, that one got around nice. That made some rounds.
What does it have? What does it have now? 3-4 million views?
I think yeah, it's one of the top ones on Instagram. Couple million. Yeah.
It's easily the best Jordan Peterson impression I've ever heard.
Oh, thanks.
Bar none, dude. It's amazing. I would say it's your best impression. And
Well, you know, it's like that all depends on what you mean by best and how and what and impression, you know, because you have to make one in order to sustain yourself. So,
That's what I would say. There's not that many of us, but there's a few Jordan Peterson guys. But yeah,
I've seen some. They're okay. Yeah, it's not as good as yours. So you do an amazing Trump. You do a great Jordan Peterson. You do a great Douglas Murray. I'm sure there are a lot of others I would love to just bounce off. I like to do impressions. I definitely don't got the skills like you do, but I have a lot of fun with it. So I do. We'll go into it. So Ami is a comedian. You do stand up. You've been doing it for quite some time. You are part of a band. I so apologize for not remembering. It's
Distant Cousins. That's all right.
Distant Cousins. So you're part of a band, and you've become a strong pro-Israel advocate since October 7th. I'm sure prior to that you were involved, but since October 7th, you've become a very prominent name. I've seen you at lots of galas. You're running around imitating everybody. You're a strong voice for the Hebrews, and you know, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate what you're doing. You add a nice spin on things with your humor. You've spoken to very prominent names in media, such as Candace Owens, and you do it very respectfully, but still sharing your thoughts and disagreeing when necessary. And so, I welcome you to the Soothing Semantics podcast, sir. Thank you.
I'm ready to be soothed. Soothe me.
Yes. Just a little bit of the spiel, the background on maybe say a couple of years prior to your famousness, your prominence in the gram and the Instagram.
Yeah, I guess the short story is I was playing in a band and made music for film and TV over the past, from like, starting in 2010, writing music for commercials, started my band around 2012, 2013, did a lot of music for film and TV. My band has gotten a lot of songs in trailers, film, television, composing for kids shows. So I was a full-time musician, composer, producer. And social media was just kind of a promotional tool that if stuff was going on, if I had a show coming up, we'd talk about it. Hey, come out to this, come out to that. But I didn't use it really creatively as any sort of tool. And I didn't really know how to use it creatively or that you could use it creatively. So I always kind of perceived it as just a way to broadcast what kind of creative stuff you're up to. So come to the show, check out a new song, just dropped an album. A lot of musicians, I think, use it that way, and I was one of them. And then when I started, sort of 2019 came around, and TikTok was not a household name yet, but it was starting to become part of the culture and the scene. People were like, have you heard about this TikTok app? And there were some people blowing up on TikTok, but it wasn't everywhere yet. So I was sort of on the mid-earlier side of things. I wasn't one of the first, but I was sort of on the earlier side. And I kind of experimented with like using social media differently with TikTok. I was like, let me see if I can actually just do consistently creating content on a daily basis and see what happens. Just like, and what could I do creatively on TikTok and do it consistently, which is something I hadn't done on social media before. So I would experiment and do some musical stuff, and impressions were one of those things I could easily pull up a video, every day. My whole thing was just like try to make something creative and cool every day and post it. And that was sort of 2019, which led into 2020. A lot of the live stuff and in-person stuff shut down, as we know, from 2020 from COVID. And I really doubled down on, I was starting to do TikTok stuff. And then one day I did a Gary Vee impression in my car after posting kind of every day for like 2 or 3 months to not much traction. But I was in my car, came across a Gary Vee video on my feed. I was like, oh, this will be fun. So I threw up my phone.
Blueberries.
Yeah.
The blueberries, dude. I remember that. You went
It's like,
off.
you know what? Just if you want to win, just move to Louisiana and start a peanut butter and start like a peanut butter company or something like that. It was like, if you want to win, move to Louisiana and start a peanut butter brand. And then like blueberries, right? Like he was really kind of starting to ascend at the time. And that video just exploded. That was like the first TikTok moment I had where something organic went viral, got shared by Barstool Sports, and sort of built me this online audience for the first time. Like within a few days, I didn't have like zillions of followers or anything, but I had a few thousand, like that felt substantial. Like for the first time, I felt like I was engaging with something when I would post a video or talk or engage with TikTok or Instagram. So that I basically just kind of doubled down, seeing that something really worked, and did a ton of Gary Vee stuff and other impressions, and was able to organically build a social media following that way, keeping it all fun and all comedy, some musical stuff occasionally, but really building an organic following. I couldn't get into the stand-up scene so much yet because everything was shut down in LA for a good 2 years. But I found rooms to go and try to work stuff out and build up the stand-up muscle. I'd been performing music live for like 15 years, but I wanted to build up the stand-up muscle as well, which is a whole different beast. I mean, there's similar aspects to it. I wasn't new to the stage, but stand-up was a new format that I wanted to get comfortable with. Moved to New York in around 2021, continued making content, sketches, impressions, collaborations, started my podcast then, and did the whole digging into dove headfirst into the stand-up scene in New York, did spots around the city, built up my act and live show, and it was all fun and games and, having a good time with it. And it was a new frontier and I was excited about it. October 7th comes around and it kind of shifted everybody. Jewish had this bit of an awakening, and especially if you were already pro-Israel and Orthodox and in the community. So that was one of those moments that was just so kind of, life-altering or traumatizing in the sense of October 7th in Israel and October 8th in the rest of the world. And I felt that for a moment, like I had never really been overtly political on my Instagram, talk politics a little bit on my podcast because it's conversational. But social media was really just a mechanism for fun. That's just how I used it. and what I felt was its purpose. But I started to just talk a little bit about Israel and offer some moral clarity on what I felt was a very confused situation and disturbing situation, not only to see what happened in Israel, but to see how the world, the civilized, supposedly civilized world, was reacting to it with confusion or apathy or even hostility in a thing that seems so morally clear. And I'm not talking about 18 months from now when there's been a lot of suffering witnessed in Gaza that I can understand why some people may be confused as to what's going on. I'm talking October 8th and 9th, where people didn't want to speak out or felt confused when you're seeing such black and white binary between good and evil in its purest form, and people either looked away. I mean, there were so many people. There was a lot of people who wanted to speak out about it, but had been so fooled by the whole context of the conversation as being controversial to even say anything, and they were sort of silenced by that. So that really bothered me too. Put out a few videos, and those sort of found a voice online as well and started resonating with people. And that took me into what I thought was a departure a little bit from what I'd normally been doing entertainment-wise. But in the end, it actually kind of deepened my relationship with the audience, took me to all these interesting places in terms of having conversations with prominent people and podcasts and whatnot. And I think at the end of the day, like it ended up forming a different dimension, but nothing that really took away in the end of it. So that's what got me into the advocacy space. And then I started using a little more of my comedy for satire purposes to sort of kind of make some little bit of a point in what I was doing, not just for the fun of it, but also to, share like a deeper angle or truth about something, and using comedy for those purposes in a satirical way. So I've added that dimension to what I've been doing, and also been growing the podcast along with it, talking about, it's interesting when like anti-Semitism, Jewish community issues, and Israel is also the center of pop culture, is a strange time that we find ourselves in. It's like the center of the world is our world. That's usually a niche world saved for like Jewish podcasts, but right now that's all front and center. So I felt that people need to be talking with as much clarity on that as possible. And that's where we are.
So it's so interesting. That was very well summed up. First of all, congrats on 10,000 subscribers
Oh, thank
on
you.
the Ami House channel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Congrats, man. That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
It's a long grind, but slowly but surely,
Yeah, yeah. I love it. I see that you have a passion for it. You've had great guests on the show, so well deserved, man. That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
So a few things. First of all, a question I have is, did you take a pretty significant hit on followers across your platforms when you started to get into the pro-Israel discussion, when you were taking a stance for Israel?
In the immediate short term, yes. Probably 15,000 dropped off of Instagram. I thought it was like 5,000, but then maybe around 15,000 total, which was weird because it was like, which one of you guys out there like Gary V impressions, Jordan Peterson impressions, and Hamas? It's a strange sliver of fans. But they left. But then I think I gained. I surpassed that eventually, like compensated with other people who came on board, probably through the advocacy and discovered the comedy. So
Without a doubt.
that worked itself out. But initially, people who were there from for the funny stuff, or if they were part of certain communities that were not down with Israel or whatever, and this came out, they dropped off. So it is what it is.
What you might have lost in numbers, you gained in quality. That's for sure. I'm sure
Yeah.
you got a lot more followers as a result of it. I just find
Mhm.
that to be the case. I sell real estate. I cover Israel. That's controversial. I've thought this through. I say to myself, I might lose some clients who really don't agree with me. But then I say, you know what? I live in South Florida.
Yeah, you're
I'm
fine.
less concerned.
Mhm. You don't have protesters there.
Yeah.
No
So
one
like
at the
I thought it
no
through.
one at the University of Miami is breaking into campus, so don't worry about
That's correct. That's correct. And the majority of the Jews here, and even the non-Jews, they either don't care, they're indifferent, or they're supportive of Israel. So
Yeah.
really not a big deal. And to me, it's extremely important to cover it. I'm so passionate about it. So
Mhm.
now that you gave us a nice overlay of what you do, impressions, pro-Israel, music, the podcast, you do quite a lot. Kind of fast forwarding a little into what's currently happening now.
Mhm.
We're having countries. Hold on. See, I did give you that preempt with the thing, but it'll turn back on. Um, you're having countries like England and I believe, and different countries are talking about cutting money, business ties, decreasing trade. They really want us to stop this war. The pressure is mounting, and it's challenging. We don't know where Trump is in terms of his meeting with Qatar. Things are very wishy-washy. We're, as Jews in general, we're like, what's going on? Who's with us? Who's against us? The water's murky now. I think we're all feeling that. And a lot of things are speculative now. And what I believe very strongly is that this war needs to continue. But it also means that as Jew, the spotlight is on us like it's never been. What are your feelings? What are you thinking? Day to day, you wake up, you go to work, you take care of your family, but all over the news, we're hearing about Gaza's war, about the war in Gaza. So what do you think?
There's a lot there. I think it's
Bit of a broad question, but
I mean, it's a multi-dimensional question because you can have different combinations of positions, like being very supportive of Israel and being very critical about the way Bibi's prosecuting the war from both the left and the right. So on the left, you could say there's too much collateral damage and it's intolerable. And from the right, you could say, why is it 18 months later and they're not defeated and our enemies are not defeated? So you could say that we could not care about the world's opinion and just disregard all of these Western powers who don't have to face the risks that Israel faces and don't have to fight Israel's enemies. Great. But if that's the case, then why have they cared up until this point? You know what I'm saying? So in other words, why let a year and a half and 18 months go by considering the world's opinion if now you're going to disregard it, only to disregard it later? So it's hard to hold that position now when perhaps because of that pressure from the United States, from the UK, from the world's opinion of Israel wanting to be, seen as accepted by the Western world in that sort of way, while sacrificing its own security and its own best interests in doing so, one could argue that that's why this is all stretched out and prolonged and the misery is prolonged, both, for Gazan civilians and for Israel. Like one could say that if you're going to take that position now, you should have taken it then, especially post October 7th in the first month or two after the war. Why? I mean, there are I think there are legitimate questions now from a pro-Israel perspective to be asked about why there wasn't pressure from the get-go on Qatar and Hamas every single day, using overwhelming force and kinetic force to say, return the hostages. Every single day a hostage is not returned, you will face military action, you will face military force. And every single day Hamas does not surrender, you'll face military force. And if the world is angry about it, and understandably so, to see this destruction that's happening, join us in our pressure on Qatar and Hamas. Qatar released, Idan Alexander was released when Qatar said so. What that demonstrates is they could have released anybody at any time. Okay? But in some ways, you could say Israel rather concerns itself with trying to show the world how humanitarian, how balanced, how precise, how they're essentially doing everything they can when they get on the news to say, no, we sent 800 trucks in, not 500, don't lie. All well and good, but what's the priority here when you're going to war? Because every time you do that, you're effectively sacrificing the security and safety of your own citizens and soldiers for the sake of some Western media approval of your restraint. And I think that is just a complete distortion or misunderstanding of what the purpose of war is supposed to be, which is if you believe you've been legitimately attacked and that your response to aggression is just, then your main priority has to be to win and retrieve your hostages and defeat Hamas. And as much as they've said that, sometimes it's hard to believe that when they have all these other competing priorities. And say what you want, the second you prioritize one thing over another, you're compromising one thing or another. These are not easy choices. The choices in war are bad and worse, And so I'm not being specific on military tactics intentionally because I'm not a military tactician, and I think a lot of armchair people in the West try to sit there and comment, and commentators try to say how they
Oh
should do
my
these
God. Oh
strikes.
my God, Ami, that is so true.
But
Oh,
I think Israel falls for it every time when they get on and try to take the bait and explain how, in fact, they are compromising their own war efforts and their own security efforts. We are putting our soldiers into harm's way. We are putting them into buildings that are booby trapped to be waiting to be killed. Don't worry, you'll see. You'll see that some of our soldiers come home in body bags too. I mean, that's the polluted morality of how they operate when you operate a war that way. That leads from a war ending in a few weeks to ending to never ending. You said you want the war to continue. I actually want it to end, but I want it to end in victory. I think that's what you probably mean to say. We don't want war for war's sake. I want victory for Israel and an end to the people who are putting a threat to Israel, namely the Hamas terrorists and the regime in Gaza that attacked it. And if you try to minimize the cost of attacking a sovereign nation, you incentivize future aggression. If you maximize the cost of that and say, do not do this, if you cross that line and you aggress, you forfeit your rights as a regime and you're sacrificing your own civilians' well-being and their lives through your aggression. Israel just didn't take that clear moral stance. Instead, they tried to do that while also claiming Hamas is totally responsible for the destruction in Gaza, but we're also responsible for cleaning it up and making sure that the well-being is taken care of. And so we're going to send you to the Kerem Shalom crossing and show you that we're sending aid and trucks into our enemies. And and does the world approve of that? It's not like the West, like you said, case in point, UK, France, all these countries are turning on Israel because Israel, at the end of the day, when you stand up for yourself and assert yourself to protect your civilians, and yes, Israel as a government has a unique responsibility to Israelis, Jews, Arabs, the people who live in Israel. That's the contract one has with the government. And they try to fall for this whole gotcha. Clearly, you value Israeli life more than Palestinian life. Well, the job of a government is to value its own citizens and civilians' lives.
First of all,
and I'm like, that's not a gotcha point. Every life, objectively speaking, is valuable, equally valuable. Under God. That's every civilian life. That's not what we're talking about with the role of a government that has the monopoly of the use of retaliatory force to protect the citizens. Every government has to prioritize its citizens over other citizens, especially civilians that belong to a regime that attacked you. You have to be strong, effective, and quick. So it ends quickly, and you do what you have to do. Now, one could theorize about all the different ways they could have done that, and you don't want. What I'm not saying is gratuitous violence or indiscriminately killing civilians. I am talking about a moral priority of saying you go to war to win the war, to have victory and end the threat. That's what proportional means. The threat is no longer a threat. And Israel allows itself and has a very high tolerance, unfortunately, for its own casualties and for its citizens to just sit there and take it, to take rockets coming in, but we get the rockets out of the sky. So each time it comes, we can handle it because it's powerful, because it has a security apparatus. They can handle it, and they have a high tolerance for their own civilians' casualties, their own soldiers' casualties, and their own civilian sense of security. And that's kind of frustrating, to be honest, as someone who wants what's best for Israel. But at the end of the day, you fall for those traps that the West sets for you, and then you lose in the East.
I agree with everything.
I want it
It's
to
tough.
end. How do you end the war? You eliminate the people who want war, and you preserve and protect the people who don't.
Right. So the thing is, I mean, I don't know if you've seen any of my content, Ami. Wouldn't be offended if you didn't. I'm quite a right-wing guy. I served in quite a right-wing unit in the IDF. And so when I say right-wing, I think my thoughts on the matter are very nuanced, but they're also very straightforward. I have very clear opinions on all this. I think one thing we try to do, and I think in the back of our mind, where a lot of people are being dishonest with themselves, is we try to separate Hamas and the Gazans completely. We make it as if the Hamas members just kind of fell from the sky into Gaza and they're controlling all the Gazans and the Gazans hate them. The Hamas members are Gazans who became Hamas members. Israeli soldiers are Israeli civilians who became Israeli soldiers. That doesn't mean that all the Gazans agree with Hamas. It doesn't mean that all Israelis agree with the IDF. This is a given. We also have to be honest, though, in the intentions of the overall Gaza population. And in my opinion, as much as I do feel bad for them to an extent, my family matters more. And so you don't get to wish for the destruction of the state of Israel, have zero interest in coexisting with us, and then complain. And hold on, I'm still here. And then complain and cry about the fact that you're not winning the war. And the world has a very hard time understanding that war is a bad thing. The idea of war is to subdue your enemy. That's what war is meant to do. I think in 2025 we have this very cutesy idea of war being this, well, you just like, win. It's just winner. How does that work, buddy? How do we win the war? Just win, you win. You go in there and you win, They don't know what it actually that's what they don't understand what
They actually say lose, but I mean,
well, they
look,
want us to lose. They want
a couple of
most
things.
of the world.
I mean,
They want us to win without anything ugly. They want the winning to happen without the ugly stuff. The war doesn't work that way.
yeah, I mean, if your standard for war is that there is no such thing as these horrible images, then you're against the concept of war, and you just be honest about it. If that's an inevitability.
Yeah, most of the world is against
The
war
question of
when it
Gazan
comes to-
civilians versus Hamas is always very tricky because obviously, the whole phrase of free Gaza from Hamas, to me, that's also a way to try to signal to the West, no. Like, are you really meaning to tell me that if you just eliminate Hamas tomorrow, we're left with a peace-loving population that wants nothing more than just to live coexistence
But
with
you see, the
Israel?
Israeli Hasbara tries to do that, and I think it's just
It's a way that
bullshit.
you're trying to appease and say like we're on the same side as you as the people who
Just
hate you.
stop it already.
But
Let's
at the end of the
stop it
day,
already.
at the same time, I do see some people. There's one guy who's been making rounds who's offered me some insight. It's an answer. It's a question I don't really know the answer to. You also have like just children, straight up children, infants. The question is, to the extent that there is suffering amongst innocent Gazans who are not of age to have agency, so I can't hold them
Sure.
accountable for the actions of their parents or even the school systems that are implementing this stuff. Hamas is accountable for that. And so it's very simple. Stop attacking Israel, return the hostages, surrender. They had a choice. There's consequences. The adults in the room who made these terrible choices, who built the whole tunnel network under it, I don't have to preach it to you, are responsible for now putting Israel in a position where they have to choose between allowing weapons caches and military facilities to remain in place, or destroying them, even if that destroying them is having to destroy them underneath a hospital, and then the hospital comes down because they've chosen that place as to operate out of. I mean, we know these things, but that's but you know what the problem I think also is that Israel will, as they continue to execute the war, they don't quite make it clear. Maybe they shouldn't have to, but the reason when, for example, say a hospital gets bombed or something. So sometimes they'll say, well, there was a Hamas, terror cell underneath the hospital. Or sometimes they'll try to say, like, I remember when that hospital got bombed and everyone blamed Israel for it, and they tried to prove that it was Islamic Jihad or whatever, which it was. It was one of their rockets. That happens too. But they tried to get on that case to say, see, it wasn't us, see, that us. But they're trying to make the case that they would never bomb a hospital. But in fact, sometimes they have to. It's militarily necessary, because otherwise no one talks about what happens if you don't do it. Nobody focuses on the unseen risk. It's always easy to criticize Israel for a strike that happens in a hospital and the weapons caches blow up and there's more destruction. And they don't talk about what happens leaving that in place and allowing terrorists with RPGs to kill soldiers or fire into Israel, because we don't see that consequence. So it's so easy to look at the real consequences and the seen consequences versus the unseen risk and consequences of leaving them in place.
But I mean, let's peel back a layer. Let's peel back a layer, because what I'm curious to discuss that I'd like to discuss with you is, why are we always explaining and justifying? But we are not in the only war that's going on in the world. Why now? It's one of the longest conflicts in recent modern history. It's a very long, 77 plus year conflict. It's incredibly long. Why do we find ourselves justifying everything?
I think that's a mistake. I think that plays into the hands of prioritizing the West's approval over your own security and safety.
Mhm.
And
Why
if
do
you're
you
in
think we do it though?
if you're in an abusive relationship with anybody, it's almost like rather than standing up for yourself and leaving that relationship, or you'd rather try to appease and say like, no, 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 I'll be good, I'll be good, I'll do this, I'll do that, because Israel, I guess, maybe wants to be. Why does Israel do that? I think Israel operates from a certain ethic of, we'll call it altruistic ethic, a sort of postmodern idea that also the U.S. operates to, that they don't prioritize their own self-defense. They prioritize sacrifice, putting others before themselves. That's sort of a thing that's plagued, I think, not just Israel, but the West in general. I mean, you look at U.S. going into Iraq. That was not a war of self-defense. That was a war to Operation Iraqi Freedom. We are going to go in and nation build a prosperous democracy. It's like, that's not why you use military force and go to war. You go to war for one reason only, and that's self-defense. And as much as we'd like to say, of course, Israel has the right to defend itself, the question is it always operating by that ethic that we're doing this out of self-defense and prioritizing the security and safety of our own citizens and civilians? They say that sometimes as lip service, just as America says, like Iraq was a war of self-defense and retaliation. But unfortunately, there's a competing ethics here, which is the ethics of sacrifice, of making sure we're helping others. And therefore that, I think, clouds the judgment, the moral judgment of saying, you know, we're also going to send all these trucks and we're going to do all these things and we're going to effectively try to make ourselves secure while compromising our security at the same time by putting the civilians of the enemy combatants above the priority and security of our own. And that's, I think, just a flawed sense of ethics that says like altruism and sacrifice are more important than self-defense, self-preservation, and safety. And that's not even a tribal thing. That's just like, it's okay to prioritize one's own life and one's own family and one's own community. That's how human beings work. We all have preferences and priorities. That's why we have representative governments. You know, I care about my kids more than your kids. That doesn't make me bad. You care about your
100%.
kids.
It'd be silly not to.
You care about your kids more than my kids. And then extend that, my extended family, my community, my country, my state. We have these representations, and we allot those organizations, we grant them certain abilities, like the use of retaliatory use of force in the form of a government to protect our individual rights. That's the priority. And governments get confused by these alternative ethics, these additional types of morality, which prioritizes the other, as in to say, I can't just do this for self-defense. That's not good enough. That's not moral enough. Israel protecting itself and its security is not good enough. I also, at the same time, have to flaunt that it's for others. It's for other. I have to prioritize the civilians of my enemy combatants, because it would be wrong to just simply protect ourselves. And I think that's what it is. I think a lot of the West operates that way. I think a lot of whether it's the UK, France, United States, people are not operating from a place of rational self-interest, where they're, even though everybody at their core level feels that way, they somehow feel that that's wrong to admit it.
Mm. Yeah, war has become this philosophical debate in the West. I don't want war. I wish we could just live alongside them and c'est la vie, do business together, go shop in each other's shops, change each other's tires. It'd be great. The reality, though, is that we've been trying this for close to 100 years. And so I think we need to be very clear about this. I think, first off, we need to prioritize finishing the war, making it a clear objective victory, and not just getting rid of Hamas, because it's an ideology and they can always replace Hamas with some other group. And so if the Gazans, if any of them do stay in Gaza, which as far as I'm concerned, I'm not opposed to the expulsion. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to say it like it is. I'm going to be very clear about that. Is that ideal? In an ideal utopian world, would I like them to be able to stay? Yes, on the condition that they are okay, that they accept Israel as a state as it is. They don't get to stay in Gaza if they have the exact same intentions that Hamas had on October 7th. It doesn't. If anyone can make logical sense on how that makes any sense, I'm all ears. But you don't get to be on the border of Israel, wish for its destruction as an overall majority population, as the majority of the population, and then you're surprised that Israel is unwilling to tolerate such belief and behavior. It doesn't work that way. So the
Yep.
only way they're going to be able to stay there is if they say, you know what, we don't like it. We don't like that Israel exists. We wish the Jews didn't have any rule over our land, quote unquote.
Mhm.
But we're tired of dying. We're clearly not going to be able to defeat these Jews. We're not going to try anymore. Let's live. Let's try to make it work. And I'm very doubtful of that, to be honest with you. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the reason for that is because it's religiously motivated more than anything else.
Yeah, I think that that's always been the case. That's always been the deal. Um, at the end of the day, the only areas where I think it's possible is that you see certain normalization efforts happening. You see the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, that to the extent that Israel has normalization with, could potentially exert their own forms of pressure to reform these ideologies. To the extent that states in the Arab world prioritize prosperity, wealth, growth. A lot of these conservative Sunni states that are led by kings, that's generally been a recipe for peace with Israel, whether it's Jordan under Hashemites or Egypt that under other kinds of leaders that are single-handedly willing to make peace and make a deal with Israel. There's models for it. I think the problem is, I don't know I'm not a scholar on this, but from what I've heard about the details in Palestinian society, it's a little bit different because you don't actually have a singular society. There are clans. You have even people in North Gaza don't identify with the people in South Gaza. The people in the West
No,
Bank.
it's much more, but there's so many more clans than that.
Yeah, there's much more clans, and there's less of a unified anything. And I think that's the West imposing this idea of a state and this concept of a state onto this part of the world that Israel accepts because they have Western values, but a lot of these cultures and societies don't. So you come in completely naive, wanting to impose a state which would be a hostile state right on Israel's border. But to the extent that other Arab countries could get involved and impose or pressure for some kind of de-radicalization efforts, maybe that's the thing. But I would just say at some point other people have to come to the table, and it's not on Israel to make sure that these surrounding cultures and societies have to reform so that they don't want to kill it. Israel's responsibility is to defend itself. The other society's responsibility is to prioritize prosperity over ideology and prioritize wanting to do what's in their best interest to actually build a society that's productive rather than destructive. So,
Totally.
But again, Israel's made, I think, certain mistakes as far as in 67, when Israel is attacked, and I think therefore does grants them certain territorial gains and rights to do certain things, where they can say like, hey, you attacked us and now there's this population of people that's hostile to us. Jordan, you have to take these people and make them part of Jordan. You attacked us. Right. We've had territorial gains. That's 67. But instead they left this area disputed and figured out maybe we can figure out a coexistence method, because there were probably maybe idealistic left-wing Israelis at the time who were like, we can figure it out. And I'm like, these are disastrous. Like, when you have the opportunity to secure yourself and say like, look, there's consequences to aggression. And now, Jordan, since you attacked us, you're responsible for repatriating and settling all these refugees. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to, it's the challenge is trying to defend certain policies. I'm not defending that policy because it leaves Israel in, I think, a worse position years and years later, having to constantly have to deal with threats and security issues from people who want to seek its destruction not only on their border, but within the territory. And so, I don't know, you're always dealing with sort of maybe a left of center idealism that in the long run puts Israel in grave danger and has disastrous consequences, lethal consequences, fatal consequences. whether it's Gaza in 2005 or the West Bank in 1967.
Suicidal empathy, like Godsod likes to say.
Yeah. So,
It's or the Finkelstein effect.
yeah. Yeah, and even putting pressure on Jordan to have solved the refugee problem in '67 would have been better for everyone, I think.
You see, I think that's where the religious ideology comes in, because if you as an Arab country accept Palestinian refugees as citizens of your country, you are now giving Israel what it wants from the
Mhm.
Muslim perspective.
Yeah, no, I get that. That's
Now we can't throw Palestinians into the fire to be a thorn in Israel's side. We're now relieving Israel of this constant threat they have.
Mhm.
We don't want to do that because in the back of our minds, we lost. I'm speaking as a Jordanian, an Egyptian, a Syrian.
Mhm.
We couldn't defeat the Jews in the major wars against it. So we don't want to get ourselves involved anymore on foot. We don't really want to be militarily involved. But if we can fund the Palestinians, if we can throw them into the fire, because most of the Arabs have hierarchical societies. There are Arabs that consider themselves of higher value, the Kuwaiti, the Bahraini,
Mm.
the Gulf Arabs are at the top. Then you have maybe the Lebanese a little lower down. You have different statuses of Arabs, right? And then the Palestinians are all the way down there. And this isn't just my
That's how
opinion.
they view them in the Arab world, or how you're
Yes,
categorizing
yes,
that way.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. This is I know I've spoken to Palestinian Americans who admit this, by the way.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
still do. I still talk to them. They know this is true. And it's interesting because my opinion,
Yeah.
and
How do
I've
they
been
feel about
saying,
you?
how do they feel about me?
Hmm. Your
They
Palestinian friends.
respect that they respect that I'm willing to say things with my chest and mean it. And the truth of the matter is what I'm saying makes sense to them.
Hmm.
They have family they have Israeli Arab family. I mean, they have Palestinian family, quote unquote, with Israeli citizenship. They know how it is. They know
Yeah.
that they have good lives. They know that. They
Mhm.
visit. They know. Israel needs to take full sovereignty over the entire thing, and then we can go from there. Because as long, I think the biggest issue, I think we're getting in our own way. As Jews as a whole, we're getting in our own way because until Israel takes sovereignty of Gaza and the West Bank, and the Palestinians, meaning if we don't do that, if we continue not to do that because of fear of backlash,
Mhm.
all the world will think, the more we continue to give the violent Palestinians, the violent ones among them, the feeling that they can eventually defeat us and that they can create a Palestinian state void of an Israeli state, the conflict will never end. But
Mhm.
when we keep incentivizing them to do it, we keep emboldening them to do it. We've been giving them incentives since the birth of the state of Israel to continue to fight us. I will give you land, the Oslo, we offer the two states this time, that time. Another thing that we do, which is asinine, and a lot of people don't think about this, because this is a very strong talking point in the Hasbara space, is we offered two states 7 times, 8 times, 9 times, however many times, and we mention that as if it's something to brag about. And the Arabs are saying, "Idiots, we'll never agree to that. Why do you keep offering something we'll never agree to?" And why would they? Why would they agree to if they ever do agree to two states, which they did during the Oslo Accords? Their goal would have obviously been to take what they could get in the moment and then continue to fight for the rest of it.
Mhm.
And I'm very surprised that there are Israelis, there are Jews in general, Israelis that are so naive to think that it's not going to work, that it'll work differently. If in a perfect world, two states would create peace, I mean, I'm a God believing person, so I do believe in the state of Israel, and I don't believe in splitting it. But from point of pragmatism, if you believe something's yours, how would you give it away? All that does is tell your enemy that it doesn't really belong to you. If you're willing to give it away, then it probably doesn't belong to you, right? Kind of a stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this whole peace process has always rested on the assumption that Israel and the Palestinians are moral equals, that they have the same moral values, that they want the same things. And that's just completely false. So it's
The
a
Arabs don't think so. The Arabs surely aren't giving us a state in their country, are they?
no, but it's also just the presumption that they're morally equal and that have the same set of morals and values and priorities, and that's a Western construct that is imposed on the region. And I do think
Mhm.
Israel has demonstrated they'd be willing to compromise in a Western sense by granting sovereignty and splitting and doing a partition since its inception. But that's not the same thing as that does not compute in a world that believes that any land that was once under Muslim control must be liberated back to Muslim control. This has nothing to do with state sovereignty, the concept of a Western state, geography. It simply has to do with it's like shame and pride and in defeat. This
100%.
must be
100%.
rectified. So there's no compromise. So you can't say, well, we'll offer you half, and their starting point is you must not exist. It's just this is all an illusion. It's always been.
100%. It's perfectly, yeah, you articulated it beautifully. The only way I believe that we're going to have peace with meaning with the Israeli Arabs,
Mhm.
for what it's worth, we have our issues, but day to day it works okay.
Mhm.
The Gazans and the West Bank Arabs,
Mhm.
they have to be, it has to be stated, if you want to live here, you need to abide by the rules. Jewish state, take it or leave it. You don't like it, bye-bye. You want to live with us? These are the rules. This is the way it has to be. The problem is we're trying to force that we're always, yeah, we're a Western democracy. We're a Western democracy. I'm sorry, but I think we're trying to force a round peg into a square hole. Square round peg into a square hole. Is that how the
Works
saying
either way.
goes?
Works either way.
It works either way. It works either way. Yeah.
Mhm.
And at some point, I love the idea of Western democracy. I love the idea of democracy and freedom. I'm a big proponent of that. But in the Middle East, you need to speak like a Middle Eastern country. We claim we're Middle Eastern people. We're
Mhm.
always trying to convince the world, oh, Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, it doesn't matter. We're Middle Eastern. We were kicked out. We were kicked around and persecuted. The Arab world's like, sure, you guys are Middle Eastern? You don't really act like it. And we're like, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. Well, we're also Middle Eastern too, but we're Middle Eastern, we're Western. We don't really know what we are. And the Arabs are like, well, if you don't know what you are, how the fuck do you expect us to know who you are?
Mhm. Yeah,
And
no,
so
I get it. You get a certain lack of and
clarity.
I lack of respect from the West and from the East when you don't stand up for who you are. That's the whole thing. As much as the West will want you to be submissive, they don't respect it. I don't think so. And
No,
so neither does the larger Middle Eastern world when you don't assume your identity and assert your strength and justification for existing and defending yourself. I think you do that, people can say what they want, but even your enemies at least will respect it. They see
look
restraint
at
as
Trump.
weakness.
Look at
You
Trump. He made that he posted that crazy video
know.
of Trump Gaza.
Hmm.
And then he went along to make some crazy deal in Qatar.
Yeah.
Whatever people want to say about him, the Middle East surely respects that guy. Do they love him? Do they actually like the guy? That begs the question. Do they have a level of respect for him? I bet they do.
Yeah, for sure.
And
Yeah.
it's because he's very sure of himself. And there's
Hmm.
something to say about that. The Middle East respects people that like that act that way.
Yeah, it's certainly a cultural thing, a temperament thing. I think when someone said, finally,
Yeah.
we have a president that speaks Arabic, it's like,
Yeah, might is right in the Middle East, and until we understand that, I think we are. I think Israel has been getting that, but so help me God, if Israel gets pressured to not finish this war, everything was for nothing. Everything was a complete waste. All the soldiers who died, all the Gazans who died, unfortunately,
mhm.
minus the ones who. Anywho, this is
Minus
where
the
it
terrorists.
gets murky. That's where it
Minus the
gets murky.
terrorists. Well, the
Uh,
terrorists, yeah.
the
Um,
terrorists, yeah,
and those
yeah.
who supported them. But yes, for sure. For sure.
It's interesting with Germany. Germany recently said that if I think they said if Eurovision, I know we're totally moving over. I just wanted to
Mm.
bring up Germany because of history, because Germany's been supportive of Israel. They mentioned that if
And they kind of
Eurovision
owe
tries
us
to,
one.
huh?
They kind of owe us one on that. So what are they going to say?
Wer have the Jews? I was also trying to see if you had a good German impression.
I haven't done a really a bear. So you not nothing too crazy
Try
actually.
me, try me. I feel like you got a good one.
A German
Oh,
voice.
we can do this together.
Oh boy, would my grandparents love to see me rocking a German podcast. But there's different kinds of Germans. There's like the soft kinds like that, yeah. And then there's, the more cutting ones.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we could
Mhm,
say that.
mhm.
The more hardcore ones.
Yes, that one.
Yes,
Hmm.
yes, indeed. But luckily they, yeah. So far so good. Um, okay. Well, Ami, I think we covered a lot of ground. If
Hmm.
there's any other thoughts or points, things that you wanted to cover but uh
I
didn't.
think I mean, you and I see eye to eye in a lot of this stuff. I think it's frustrating, unfortunately, that things have dragged out for this long, and as there's frustrations with that. I will say though, I think that we're at a point now where, unfortunately, whatever movable middle there has been, and that by that I mean people who really knew nothing about this, have no skin in the game, and are simply watching from afar. My message to people out there is like, don't respond to ignorance with shame, hate, vitriol. It's understandable to get frustrated when people out there in the podcast space get it wrong. But if
Mhm.
you have empathy plus ignorance, that's understandable. What do you expect? A lot of people think, well, they take for granted the fact that when people criticize Israel out there, they're criticizing oftentimes, unless they're really bad actors, and we know who those people are. But there's a lot of people like having questions, they're curious, they're asking what's going on, they're inquiring, and then they get shut down by the pro-Israel side. They get shamed, they get called hateful. And
Mhm.
if you think that that does anything to move them closer to your perspective or see where you're coming from, you're dead wrong. And it does the exact opposite. So naming and shaming and not being discerning over who's actually hateful and nefarious versus who's curious and ignorant but empathetic,
Mhm.
you know, make sure you're discerning on that. I mean, like, because we do want a world that sees tragedy and the horrors of war and reacts with empathy. You don't want people to just shrug their shoulders and say whatever. You
Totally.
know, Israel is effectively punished by its own success. The fact that Israel doesn't look like it's in shambles is because it protects itself and because it invests in such things. And so we have to make that message clear. If every single rocket that's ever been fired at Israel fell, if every single terrorist attack was allowed to have happened, if Israel didn't invest in any of its own security, if Israeli soldiers forced every one of its citizens to stand in front as rockets fell down, maybe the world's opinion would be different and have more empathy for Israel. And I would not make that trade. But that doesn't mean that when they see this destruction, that's just how human beings react psychologically. So be a little bit discerning because it does you no favors. And I think the reason people react that way is because people out there criticizing or having questions or second thoughts about which side they're on about Israel at this point, I wouldn't say that on October 8th or 9th, but 18 months later, um, we take it personally. We see that as like they think they're criticizing a government, and we think they're criticizing our families and our cousins and our chayalim and people that we know fighting on the front lines. And it's not like they know that. They don't understand our connection to it. To Israel, to us, is not a government or a state. It's it's family, it's friends, it's place,
Yeah.
it's what we've lived through, where we visited. It's our WhatsApp chats of soldiers, where they are. It's hearing reports back of who's been lost. It's hostage families we've spoken to. But they don't know that. And
Right.
so you can't expect them to if they're not in our communities. And it's sort of a sign of the insular nature of our world that we expect everybody to understand what's going on. And when they get it wrong, they get eviscerated and shamed.
Right.
That's
Right.
totally misguided. If you had a Nigerian friend and there was a conflict in Nigeria with his religious community and another community trying to attack it, but it was in Nigeria and you knew nothing about it and then started having questions and he called you racist, anti-Nigerian every time you asked a question, would you be more sympathetic to him or not? Ask yourself the question. And all you saw was, you know, footage day in and day out across social media of the side that he's fighting against suffering. It's just you have to at some point get out of your own head a little bit. Doesn't make your positions. It doesn't make you not right, and it doesn't make them. It doesn't make you not right, and it doesn't make them correct. They could still be wrong in their conclusions, but you can understand why you would come to that, and don't meet ignorance and empathy with hate. It's completely self-defeating.
Right, right. It's kind of also like how we sometimes we're too quick to throw the anti-Semitic label at people,
Of
and
course.
it's a big mistake. It's a big mistake. Canceling a point as opposed to being willing to combat it. Meaning, I'm willing to get in front of a camera and talk to these people. It's
Yeah,
gonna
I think
hold a lot more weight.
I think you
And
come across as reactionary and weak if you can't say like, "Hey, someone's allowed to be wrong." That's just the truth. They're allowed to be wrong. Doesn't make them
100%.
bad.
And at the end of the day, I'm allowed to be wrong too. Like there are
Yeah.
times when we're all wrong. I think people who as Jews we love Israel and we always want to feel like Israel's always doing the right thing, and that's not the case. We have to be willing to admit that too.
Even if
So,
they
but at
are
the
doing the
same time,
right thing, it's okay for someone to not see how.
no, I do think overall, I'm saying that of
Yeah.
course we're not perfect. We're not a perfect people, and we don't have a perfect country. That
Yeah,
was just
yeah,
my
yeah.
point. But yeah, I
But
mean that's what it comes down to. So,
yeah.
but then there's also times to just tell people to go fuck themselves. There's also time for that.
It
There's
depends who the
sometimes where the
person
dial.
is. Some person
Yeah,
needs some people need to hear that.
there's some people that are just not worth having the conversation with,
Mhm.
and I reserve those statements for them sometimes. So it happens
Reserve them. And that's what
for
I would
sure.
say.
So Ami, thank you so much. It ended up being very we really we had a quite an intense discussion,
Hmm.
which I really appreciate. I love your thoughts on the topic of the Gaza war and the geopolitics in the Middle East. So thank you.
Thank you.
Definitely would have loved a little bit more of the comedy side, but happy it
Well,
went
we'll
the
get
way.
to that on another time. Don't worry about that. Rafi Pinsky, real estate. I'm a real estate guy, so you got great buildings. Keep it going. And we love Florida. There you go.
That's it. Do you do
JB.
real estate too?
No,
Okay, you were
Trump
just imitating.
does.
No, I know you're imitating Trump, but you have so
No,
many
no.
different things you do. I wouldn't be
Yeah,
surprised.
yeah. I don't have time for that, but
I
I'm
got you.
sure it's a.
I got you. Well, hopefully you'll buy a nice vacation home in on Venetian Island at some point.
I'll call you for it. All right.
Fantabulous.
All right, man.
So, Mr. Donald J. Douglas Murray Peterson, I appreciate you immensely. Thank you, sir, for joining. It did take some follow-up, guys. It
Hmm.
did take some follow-up.
Well,
He didn't. He wanted to say yes. He thought I was pretty cool, but he's like, you know what? I'm going to make this guy work for it a little bit.
why not?
So that's where we are. Like, subscribe, share, leave your comments. Go follow Ami's House, the Ami's House podcast
Mhm.
on YouTube. You can follow him at Ami Kozak on Instagram. He also has his Ami Kozak YouTube channel, which I saw recently. You got about 40,000 subs on there.
Mhm.
And is there anything else you'd like in terms of support Patreon, anything like that? Please
Yeah, yeah. Support the
take
Ami's House
your
Patreon. Support us on YouTube. Band's called Distant Cousins if you want to listen to some music. And keep following. I'm also on Twitter at Ami Kozak, so you can find me there as well.
Fantastic. Ami, thank you again for joining. This has been another episode of the Soothing Semantics podcast.
Great to
Until
be
next
here.
time, peace.